Good evening and welcome to the Virtual Women's Club for TWC Meets the Artist. For those that haven't met me, my name is Augusta Supple and I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this evening we're all meeting on Aboriginal lands. I'm calling in from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, which has only recently been known as Dulwich Hill in Sydney's inner west. I'd like to acknowledge that the traditional custodians, elders past, present and emerging, have always had a connection to and thank them for their care of country for more than 60,000 years. I acknowledge this deep connection to the waterways, to the land, birds, animals and plants are celebrated through practices of culture, through song, in dance and through storytelling. I acknowledge that this country was never ceded and that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to the second week of October's TWC Meets the Artist series. I'd like to thank all of you Women's Club members and guests for joining us online to celebrate women in the arts. Through the Meet the Artist series, we hope you find inspiration and appreciation for some of our leading arts and cultural thinkers, performers and makers. Some you might know, some you think you might know, and others you might yet discover. Tonight, we are starting our second week featuring producers and artistic directors. And I'm so excited to introduce to you incoming Artistic Director of Sydney Festival, Olivia Ansell. Olivia comes to the role with over 20 years experience as an artist and key creative, promoter and producer, working across tourism, media and entertainment. And over the last 15 years, Olivia has brokered and developed new Australian work and large-scale festival events across 6 continents. Which is pretty exciting. So I'm sure if you've got a lot of questions for Olivia, this is just a reminder to use the Q&A function so that I can pass those questions on to Olivia if we've got time at the end of the session. But without further ado, I'd like to say good evening and welcome to the Women's Club, Olivia.
Thanks, Augusta, and thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It really is wonderful. It's so exciting to have you join us this evening, and we're going to have a little bit of a conversation, a bit of a chat. But first up, I think lots of people know the Sydney Festival, but maybe not many people know you and your origin story. So I'm just curious to know, where did everything begin? If you can take us back to the very beginning of your relationship with the arts.
Thanks, Augusta. So I am a Sydney girl. I was born in Sydney. My mother was a choreographer and a dancer, and my father a composer and a jazz musician. And my grandparents, so on my mother's side, my grandfather was a magician and a juggling artist and a puppeteer. And my grandmother was an and vaudeville star. So she frequented the and that's where she met. And on my father's side, my grandmother on that side, she was a classical musician. She was a violinist. But given that she grew up in the early 20th century, so very much during the Great Depression, and was a working mother during World War II. She had an accountancy degree, so she would perform in classical music recitals in the evenings, and she was an accountant by day. So everybody had the dual roles then, or 3 roles actually, like a mother, an accountant working full time, and a classical musician. So I guess culture was definitely, amongst my grandparents. It's what they were performers, and then they had children. Obviously, my mother and father both in the music and dance profession. And so when I was born, I think they were determined that their child would do anything but the arts. It was. We think it's really exotic to be a magician or a juggler or a choreographer or a jazz musician, but in their world, it's very exotic to be a lawyer or a doctor or an astrophysicist or something other than an artist, because that seemed like a very like kind of everyday an everyday gig. And they were really fascinated by somebody that could go to university and train in something else. But you have to imagine that the environment as a child growing up, you know, it was normal to me, but you know, it was quite eccentric. So, you know, I remember my grandfather would mind me, and we had the full show. Yeah, and he used to do the old magic trick where you cut people in half, and we would think that was, you know, an everyday act. And my mother had a rehearsal studio at the rear of the house, and my father had a recording studio in the basement of the house. And musicians write their best music at 2 a.m. in the morning, 3 a.m. in the morning. Like there's not normal work 9 to 5 working hours. So all through the night, musicians would be knocking on the front door to put their part down for a particular part of the score that was being composed, or the new record that was being created. And then a swathe of artists would be turning up to rehearse a different show, and they'd be in the dance studio at the rear of the house. And as a young artist, I would answer the door in my school uniform and ask the artist if they wanted a coffee, or if it was a producer coming in because there was a jingle being put down, I'd ask, can I get you a coffee, you know, with milk, with sugar? And I would chat to these artists in the lounge room, and then I'd either send them downstairs to the recording studio or out to the back of the house to the dance studio, depending on who turned up. And I studied dance and theatre and music myself, and became a performer for many years and was sort of producing and performing during my 20s. I had no formal training in being a producer, but the craft of it fascinated me. And by the time I turned 30, I had become a producer and curator full time. I decided I no longer wanted to perform, not because I felt that time had passed as an artist, but my brain was so hungry for seeing how things could manifest, seeing all the parts come together. But the reason that I truly think I became a producer was going back to that child answering the front door in the school uniform and asking the artists if they wanted a cup of tea or coffee, because we would talk. And I would ask them questions about what they were working on, what film or what series or what album. And I was so inspired by hearing them talk about that I grew a fascination of musing with artists, collaboration. And many years later, I'm exactly in the place I want to be, which is not on stage, behind the stage, and empowering and talking with a lot of artists to make great work happen. You know, that is definitely my happy place.
It's what an incredible story. And absolutely, I think there's a lot of people that would love to go to the Ansell School of Producing to get a little bit of that magic that you seem to have wherever you go. So I'm curious to ask, when you started your career, were there specific people that really informed how you thought about your practice or the mode of producing or artistic direction? Was there any sort of particular people besides your family?
That's a really interesting question. And I think, and I will answer it, but in training to be an artist, I was always advised that if you were going to take that up as a career, we advise you not to, but if you are going to take it as a career, learn as much as possible. You know, like my father being a jazz musician and a composer, he's like, learn this repertoire, learn that repertoire, learn as much repertoire as you can so that you're really employable. So if you relate that to dance, I would do, you know, Lamont and Taylor, Dunham and Horton and jazz and tap and classical ballet and every single style you could access. I even learnt Buto at one point. And then as an actor, it was like classical text, puppetry, learn everything you can, and singing, learn all the repertoire. So you found yourself as an artist training in so many different styles so that you could go to every audition and seize every opportunity. Training overseas for me, and then back in Australia. What that meant that I was in and out of a lot of different pockets. So I would be in that modern dance world 1 minute, and the next thing you know, I would book a musical. So I would be in that world. And I saw many different there were many different defining moments where people fascinated me. In a modern dance world, I was inspired by Twyla Tharp because I thought she was such a pioneer. She just got out there and did it. I mean, who choreographs an entire musical to the music of Billy Joel, at a time when, she was just taking huge risks, and like her choreography on Hair in the 70s was quite legendary and radical, in Central Park, if you remember that clip. And then in other worlds, it was, to be honest, it was actually this one season that I watched somebody who was an actor, and they were in the show, they directed the show, and they were producing it themselves. And I remember thinking, wow, that's impressive, that can really happen. And so it was watching self-starters that that inspired me, and people that had, started out as an artist, including Lindy Hume, who is a previous Sydney Festival director, the only other female Sydney Festival director. I had just graduated and was working with Opera Queensland on a production, and Lindy was the director, and somebody whispered to me that she used to be a dancer, and had made her way to opera director, and I thought that was pretty impressive. So I held Lindy in very high regard, and then many years later she went on to be the director of the Sydney Festival. So again, by that stage I was a young producer, and my first event at Sydney Festival that I produced was under Lindy Hume's artistic direction that year. So, and I still look up to Lindy now. So there's been many leaders in the sector.
Yeah, what was that show?
The show that we did at Sydney Festival was with the Australian Chamber Orchestra, the ACO2, the youth ensemble, and You Move Company from Parramatta, which was a Western Sydney-based dance company, and we were double billed with Sydney Dance Company, and it was the first time the Sydney Festival had presented a big outdoor concert in Parramatta Park, and because Lindy really took the large concerts to Western Sydney, like that was the projects that really flourished under Lindy's direction at the Sydney Festival, which we don't launch till November, but I'm really proud to say that is, one of the hallmark events of the festival annually.
That's really very, very inspiring. And I love that link as well between the sort of, her legacy and now the legacy that you're about to share with us next month as you sort of forge forward. As you said, you've worked with a lot of independent companies and sort of small entities, and you've worked on a lot of partnerships. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the things that you've also worked at the Sydney Opera House, and I'm wondering if there are specific skills or an ideology or a philosophy or how to work that translates really well from the sort of small to medium independent smell of an oily rag kind of producing into the big house sort of producing kind of gigs that you've done.
Well, I think a great idea is a great idea. If somebody has a wonderful idea, you can sit down and map out a pathway to produce it. If it's a great idea, it'll attract stakeholders. And with attracting stakeholders, hopefully comes some financial resource and production resource and audience and, artists. So what I've learned, and just from watching, and experiencing a range of projects over my career, is that if you have nothing around you but a great idea, but you have good guidance as to who to pitch that idea into and how to lift it off the page, you really have a strong asset, and you should. It was a great idea, as a really neat little concept. Then came the regional touring, then the global expansion of having 3 casts of that simple idea all around the world. And that what was to be, one small project is still touring now. And I love it when people find those moments. And in terms of small to medium sector, I feel really honoured to be sitting on a panel for Create New South Wales for dance, physical theatre and circus. And so we assess a lot of applications twice per year, and I really enjoy seeing the works come through, and in that process, when people put forward their annual program of of cultural activity, you'll see the artists have come across this idea that they're going to lift off the page and put it into workshop, and then put it into a second stage development, and then tour it nationally and then internationally. And it's wonderful because they come back to report on how that project went, and it's lovely to see that expansion as well. And the flip side of that is you can see, especially on the commercial end of town, a lot of money passing hands and people throwing paint at walls to see what sticks. But at the end of the day, no one has a good idea, and the show just doesn't really make it very far, or the project or the installation, whatever it is. So I think having that belief in yourself and belief in what you are creating and belief in your long-term vision is really important.
Well, that's something clearly that you've really lived by and that you've done yourself. I heard a few years ago, I think it was probably around the time when Robin Archer became the artistic director of the Festival of Canberra. I think that was like 2009, something like that. And she was in a conversation during the Sydney Festival with, I think, the Berlin Festival director. And they were talking about how key it is that they feel, well, he had the hypothesis that all great festival directors come from a music background, because inherent in music practice is listening and knowing your part in the band or the orchestra. So maybe something your dad as a jazz musician might agree with. You come from a dance background though, which means that you might have quite a different sensibility about what a festival direction or curation or producing might mean. So can you, what do you think of that hypothesis about listening and musician? Is there something in it for dancers and choreographers?
There's definitely something in it in terms of curation, programming and music, because music moves you physically. So of course there's that natural connection between dance and music because it moves you physically, but music moves you emotionally. Music moves your experience to something. I'm not sure if you've ever been in the editing suite and you've watched a piece of vision without music, and then you've put it with a highly emotional piece of music, or then a brooding piece of music, or a gripping suspense-filled instrumental track, and you can almost mastermind the emotion of the viewer by the different soundtrack that you apply. And I think even if it's marketing materials for a festival, you want to see a movement through it. You want to see a narrative journey. Like, what is the narrative cohesive journey of a festival program? How does it move you? And I definitely think of that in a musical sense. And I'm not going to lie, I will far better appreciate a text-based work if there's a really moving score that can help sort of color the narrative arc. So I definitely work to a music-driven curatorial theme, and I think, and I discovered this sort of around a decade ago, spending a lot of time in the editing suite, as you do when you work for a small to medium, because you have to be very resourceful. So you're the executive producer, but you're also the assistant editor. You're many things. And I discovered a love of editing because I realized it's like choreography, especially editing to music. And I remember sitting with this brilliant film editor, and I said to her, oh, I love what we're doing here, because you have to time it, and you're in control of the journey through the editing suite process. And I decided that choreographers could make very good film editors, and also cinematographers, because of the angle and the direction, and it's the movement of the camera, it's the movement of the eye. So there's definitely a synergy. I don't doubt, Augusta.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it, because there's that idea of being sort of like no dance can happen without space, and with and there's also something quite interesting about your background.
The relationship to space as well.
Absolutely. And I guess one of your sort of, I guess, more off the beaten track kind of ventures many years ago was Hidden Sydney, where you sort of saw space in a bit of a different way. Do you want to describe that project for people that might not be familiar with what that was?
Yeah, sure. Many years ago, I went and, as many people have, I experienced Sleep No More in New York, the immersive work in the 4-story warehouse at the McKittrick Hotel. And I have a real passion for Sydney and its history and Sydney stories. And I remember thinking, wouldn't it be great to find a location in Sydney that could tell the history, some of our most colourful stories of Sydney's past, and a little bit different to Sleep No More, where in this instance it's text-based in some rooms, or song-based or dance-based. So it's a hybrid of performance genres, where we retell some of the stories of King's Cross. And to be honest, you know, that was subconsciously sitting in the back of my mind, but it was a recce. You know, I was looking for rehearsal space for a brand new theatre company. The Hayes Theatre Co. had just decided to open its doors as a dedicated home for music theatre. And I bumped into Neil Gooding and David Campbell, and they said, we want to make a home for music theatre in Potts Point. And I said, that sounds like a great idea. I'll come and help. So we were looking for rehearsal space, and I walked into this old terrace on Bayswater Road that is above Candy's apartment, which used to be the Cardoma Cafe in the 70s. And as I was walking through all the rooms, and it was a doctor's residence, the Nevada Manor, and then in the 70s, it was a brothel during the Vietnam War, one of King's Cross's most famous brothels, over 4 floors. And I was walking from one room to the next, and I thought, if these walls could speak, you know, if these walls could speak on Sydney's history, and if you've watched the Underbelly series and read King's Cross, a biography by Louis Nowra, you would share that with me. And Kellett Street and Mansion Lane that it backs onto, there's just so much history, including the showgirl Shirley Bager, who shot her husband and got off. You know, she didn't go to jail because she said in the court that she just loved him too much. So there are a lot of stories around that one block of the Cross. And as I walked through each room, the stories, the potential of the stories just started, you know, ringing in my ear. And going back to that, if you've got a good idea, the resources will come. I remember saying to Wendy Richards, who I co-produced the show with, I said, I've just come back from this recce and I've got this great idea. So we sat down and wrote a grant application, and then, you know, pitched it to the City of Sydney, and on came different stakeholders, and 3 sold out seasons later, it still has this cult following.
It was an absolutely amazing experience, because it was sort of walking the streets, and there was this sort of ambient, sort of natural space and place of people appearing behind garbage bins, and me having this sort of response of, is that an actor or is that a real person? Like, it was so surprising. And you know, I think something that really showed this beautiful sense of innovation, but an honoring of history at the same time. I thought it was such a fantastic show, and really showed, I guess, your tenacity, especially at a time when, I guess, regulation around performance was not an easy space to be navigating. You know, so you've gone from sort of like those kind of interesting producing challenges into the Opera House. I'm wondering, is there something particular, do you think, about the idea of Sydney for artists internationally when they're thinking about maybe touring? Either, is there something about our particular city that you think that is seen afresh in the eyes of, you know, the outsider?
It was always wonderful working at Sydney Opera House. In my role there, I was head of contemporary performance, and we had a broad array of international and Australian artists that would perform in that program, and obviously they still do now. But in traveling to, you know, meet with artists, meet with agents, and entice artists to come to Australia, the common response was, oh, we would absolutely love to come to Australia, but the flight's so long, or, you know, but I know that we'll make this work because this or that particular artist, it's on their bucket list to play Sydney. they just have to play Sydney. You know, we've heard so much about Sydney. We can't wait to come and be there and perform, you know, for that city. And it might have been that, oh, we can't do it next year or the year after, but let's put a pencil in 4 years' time. But I'm telling you, it's on their bucket list. They absolutely want to make the trip. And so, you know, and then we begin the dance of putting together a tour and the different things to make it viable for that artist to spend the time traveling. And that was all pre-COVID, Augusta. So I do wonder, you know, post-COVID, now that we've got this renewed sense of living, you know, as I said to you earlier, the least of our worries is whether we need to sit on a plane for 24 hours. So unfortunately, there's bigger things to think about, you know, from pandemics to climate change and what have you. But I think that the world truly sees an opportunity to perform in Sydney as a wonderful thing, and definitely up there in the top 10 things to do as an artist, which is wonderful for us.
It is. It's a real honor to be able to have sort of like that kind of reputation globally, and it's fantastic that as a festival director, you're now our major ambassador when it comes to the sort of in the festival circuit, which is really, really exciting. So my last big question really for you is that as the new artistic director of the Sydney Festival, is there anything in particular that in the last year, especially given the context that everyone's working in, where you've had a new vision or a new feeling about what needs to happen in our city, and what really the Sydney Festival's role will take in our summertime sort of activity?
Oh, absolutely. The last 116 days, I mean, it's easy to lose count, isn't it, how many days we've been locked down. It got very dark. There was I remember watching some of the stories that came across the news and thinking, there's a role and responsibility here that Sydney Festival can play with Sydney-siders, and hopefully with Australians interstate as well, now that, you know, travel, borders and travel are starting to open up. And that is to unite and recover, you know, to unite Sydney's community back together and to recover culture safely to our city, and to bond again, to heal. And, you know, speaking of music earlier, the powerful tool that music and theatre and dance and circus and physical theatre and visual art and many visual art and performing arts genres can have to heal us, as a calmative, as a source of, you know, of healing and an enabler for people to come together. Honestly, we've watched so much digital content in the last 4 months, but I cannot wait to be back in the theatre and see that actor on the stage and see that exchange of energies and hearing the audience's response to a particular work, and to buzz around in the foyer afterwards and talk about it and to provocate and exchange ideas on how one another experience the work. Nothing can ever replace that. And, you know, we've missed it. And sometimes I've wondered, why do I feel so flat, or why do I feel so glum, you know, and that whole part of our DNA has been missing, you know, and I've spent so much time watching a screen and engaging with culture that way. And don't get me wrong, you know, we've got some brilliant series on Netflix, and it's wonderful for the production industry, for new Australian drama and international drama globally. But like this is such a unique art form of live theatre. It's a unique medium. And despite how progressive the world gets with digital technology, I really hope that medium prevails, because we've certainly missed it.
Absolutely. And I think that we're all gnashing at the bit to get back to gathering again and communing, really, and coming and hearing that. I always used to think of something that my mother used to say, which was basically the thing that you can't get from a television screen, but you can definitely get, is the experience of the smell of the ballet dancers as they're running down the aisle, you know, onto the stage, if you know, if that's happening, that sort of that energy and that frisson that happens when we're in real time, real space, and we're experiencing that togetherness. It's a really, really special thing. We're going to have the great pleasure of seeing your first festival that you've curated launch. Is it next month?
Next month on the 17th of November.
Great. So we're going to have to pencil that in as the day that we get to see the great unveiling of your program. And it's been so wonderful to hear of your wonderful and quite magical childhood full of puppets and jazz musicians and magical folk. Thank you so much, Olivia, for joining us this evening, for your energy and your vision and your bright shining light that will lead us into the summertime in our city. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Augusta.
Yeah, and I hope to invite you to the club to raise a glass to your success and your impending festival in a couple of months' time when we all get back to normal. So look out for that invite, Olivia. We'd love to host you.
Thanks, Augusta.
I'd also like to thank you and acknowledge that you're donating your speaker's fee tonight to support emerging artists for performing opportunities at the Women's Club coming up.